The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand hallways of Kensington Palace as Queen Camilla walked purposefully through the corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished marble floors, each step deliberate and measured. She had been planning this moment for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity when the palace would be quiet enough for her to explore without interruption. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, was away on an official engagement in Scotland with Prince William. The children were at school and most of the staff were attending to their duties in other wings of the palace. It was the ideal time for Camilla to satisfy her growing curiosity about Kate's private quarters. For months, Camilla had heard whispers among the palace staff about Kate's private room, a sanctuary where the princess kept her most personal belongings, wrote in her private journals, and retreated when she needed solitude. The room was strictly off-limits to everyone except Kate herself and her most trusted lady-in-waiting. Even Prince William respected this boundary, understanding his wife's need for a completely private space in their very public life. As Camilla approached the familiar corridor that led to Kate's private wing, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had always been curious about her daughter-in-law's inner thoughts and private world. Despite their public appearances of unity and family harmony, Camilla sometimes sensed there were layers to Kate that remained hidden from view. The relationship between Camilla and Kate had been complex from the beginning. While they maintained a cordial and respectful public facade, there had always been an underlying tension. Kate represented the future of the monarchy, young, beautiful, and beloved by the public in a way that reminded many of Princess Diana. Camilla, despite her years of service and her marriage to Charles, still felt the shadow of comparison and sometimes wondered what Kate truly thought of her. The corridor grew quieter as Camilla moved deeper into Kate's private wing. The decor here was noticeably different from the rest of the palace, more personal, with photographs of the family, artwork that Kate had chosen herself, and small touches that reflected her personality. Camilla paused at several family photos, studying them carefully. There were images of Kate and William from their engagement, pictures of the children at various ages, and candid shots from family vacations. One photograph in particular caught Camilla's attention. It showed Kate laughing with Queen Elizabeth II during what appeared to be a private moment at Balmoral. The late Queen's face was animated with genuine joy, and Kate looked completely at ease. Camilla felt a pang of something, perhaps envy, perhaps sadness, as she remembered how long it had taken her to achieve that same level of comfort and acceptance with Elizabeth. Continuing down the corridor, Camilla passed Kate's office, where she could see neat stacks of correspondence and charity work materials on the desk. Through the partially open door, she glimpsed bookshelves lined with volumes on child development, photography, and British history. There were also several well-worn novels and what appeared to be poetry collections. Finally, Camilla reached the door she had been seeking. Kate's private room. The door was solid oak, darker than the others in the corridor, with an elegant brass nameplate that simply read, "Private." There was something almost sacred about this threshold, and for a moment, Camilla hesitated. She knew she was crossing a line, violating a trust that had taken years to build, but her curiosity proved stronger than her conscience. She reached for the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but to her surprise, it turned easily in her hand. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a room that was unlike anything else in the palace. The space was intimate and cozy, furnished more like a comfortable sitting room in a country cottage than a royal apartment. Soft afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over everything. The walls were painted in a soft cream color, and there were several pieces of artwork that Camilla didn't recognize, probably personal pieces that Kate had collected over the years. A comfortable reading chair sat by the window, with a small side table that held a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, and a book that was left open, as if Kate had just stepped away for a moment. Camilla moved closer to see what Kate had been reading and was surprised to find it was a biography of Queen Alexandra, the Danish princess who had married into the British royal family in the 19th century. On the opposite side of the room was an elegant writing desk, its surface covered with papers, photographs, and what appeared to be journal entries written in Kate's careful handwriting. Camilla's eyes were immediately drawn to these personal documents, her curiosity overwhelming her sense of propriety. She approached the desk slowly, as if she were entering a sacred space. The papers were arranged in neat piles, and she could see that some were letters, both incoming correspondence and drafts of replies in Kate's handwriting. There were also what appeared to be notes for speeches, ideas for charity initiatives, and personal reflections on various royal duties and events. One document in particular caught her attention. It was a handwritten letter, clearly a draft, addressed to Darling William. Camilla's heart raced as she realized she was looking at a private communication between the Prince and Princess of Wales. Despite knowing she shouldn't read it, she found herself unable to look away. The letter spoke of Kate's concerns about the children's education, her thoughts on upcoming royal engagements, and her feelings about the increasing public scrutiny they faced as a family. But it was the final paragraph that made Camilla's breath catch. Kate had written about feeling isolated within the royal family, about struggling to find her place among people who had known each other for decades before she arrived. "Sometimes I wonder if I will ever truly belong," Kate had written. "There are moments when I feel like an outsider looking in, even after all these years. I see the way the family interacts with such ease and history, and I wonder if they will ever see me as more than William's wife who happened to become one of them." Camilla felt a complex mix of emotions as she read these words. Part of her felt guilty for invading Kate's privacy, but another part felt an unexpected surge of empathy. She remembered her own struggles to find acceptance within the royal family, the years of feeling like an intruder in a world that had very clear rules about who belonged and who didn't. She continued to explore the room, finding a small bookshelf filled with journals dating back several years. The spines were labeled with dates, creating a chronological record of Kate's private thoughts throughout her time as a member of the royal family. Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she considered the treasure trove of insights these journals might contain. On a small table near the bookshelf, she found a collection of photographs that weren't displayed anywhere else in the palace. These were clearly personal shots, candid moments with the children, private family gatherings, and images from their life at Anmere Hall. There were also several photographs of Kate with friends from her life before marriage, reminders of the world she had left behind to join the royal family. One photograph showed Kate at what appeared to be a university reunion, laughing with friends who looked completely normal and unpretentious. In the image, Kate looked relaxed and carefree in a way that Camilla rarely saw her in their official family gatherings. It struck her that Kate had given up not just privacy but also the ease of normal relationships when she married William. As Camilla continued to examine the room, she discovered a small alcove that contained what appeared to be Kate's most treasured possessions. There was a simple wooden box that held jewelry that was clearly not from the royal collection, pieces that looked like family heirlooms or gifts from friends. There was also a collection of letters tied with a ribbon, and from the handwriting on the visible envelopes, they appeared to be from Kate's parents and siblings. The emotional weight of what she was seeing began to settle on Camilla. This room represented everything that Kate had to keep hidden from public view: her doubts, her homesickness, her struggle to maintain her identity while fulfilling her royal duties. It was a side of her daughter-in-law that Camilla had never imagined existed. She found herself thinking about the public perception of Kate as the perfect princess, always poised and graceful, never putting a foot wrong. The media portrayed her as someone who had seamlessly transitioned from middle-class life to royal duty, but the evidence in this room told a very different story. Kate was human, with all the insecurities and struggles that came with trying to live up to impossible expectations. Camilla picked up one of the journals, her hands shaking slightly as she considered whether to open it. She knew that reading it would be a profound violation of Kate's trust, but the temptation was overwhelming. The journal was leather-bound and well-worn, suggesting it was one that Kate turned to frequently. As she stood there holding the journal and wrestling with her conscience, Camilla heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the corridor outside. They were measured and purposeful, clearly belonging to someone who belonged in this part of the palace. Her heart began to race as she realized she might be discovered in this most private of spaces. The footsteps grew closer, and Camilla quickly tried to return everything to its original position. But in her haste, she knocked over a small frame containing a photograph of Kate and William on their wedding day. The glass cracked with a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet room, and Camilla stared at the damaged photograph with horror. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and Camilla heard a voice she recognized as belonging to James Morrison, one of the senior palace guards. He was speaking quietly into his radio, and she could make out enough to understand that he was reporting something unusual. A door that should have been locked was standing open. Panic flooded through Camilla as she realized the gravity of her situation. She was the queen consort, discovered in the Princess of Wales's private room, clearly going through personal belongings. The scandal would be enormous, and the damage to family relationships could be irreparable. But more than that, she was genuinely ashamed of her behavior. She had violated Kate's trust and privacy in the most fundamental way. The door handle began to turn, and Camilla knew there was no escape. In a matter of seconds, she would be face to face with the guard, and her transgression would be impossible to explain away. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, still holding Kate's journal, surrounded by the evidence of her intrusion into this sacred space. As the door opened wider, James Morrison's face appeared, and his expression immediately shifted from professional alertness to shocked recognition. His eyes took in the scene, the queen consort standing in the Princess of Wales's private room, clearly having been going through personal belongings, with a cracked photograph at her feet and a private journal in her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of what had been discovered. James was a veteran palace guard who had served the royal family for over 20 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this situation. Protocol was clear about unauthorized entry into private royal apartments. But how did one handle a situation where the transgressor was the queen consort herself? Camilla's mind raced as she tried to think of something to say, some explanation that might make this situation less damaging. But she knew there was nothing she could say that would justify her presence in this room, going through Kate's most personal belongings. She had been caught red-handed, and the shame of it was overwhelming. The photograph of Kate and William lay at her feet, the crack in the glass catching the afternoon light and serving as a painful metaphor for what Camilla had potentially broken with her actions. Their relationship, the family harmony that had been so carefully cultivated over the years, the trust that had taken so long to build, all of it was now in jeopardy because of her moment of weakness and curiosity. James finally found his voice, though his tone was carefully controlled and professional despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. The words he spoke would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the royal family to its core and test the bonds that held them together. "Your Majesty," James Morrison said slowly, his voice carefully controlled despite the shock evident in his eyes. "I'm afraid this area is restricted. The Princess of Wales specifically requested that no one enter this room in her absence." Camilla felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. Anger at herself for being in this position, and anger at the situation for being so humiliating. She was the queen consort, and here she was being questioned by a palace guard about her whereabouts. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being treated like a common intruder in what was supposed to be her own home. "I'm well aware of where I am," Camilla replied, trying to inject some authority into her voice while still clutching Kate's journal. But even as she spoke, she knew how weak her position was. There was no reasonable explanation for her presence in this room, and they both knew it. James Morrison had been with the royal family long enough to navigate delicate situations with diplomacy, but this was unlike anything he had encountered before. His loyalty was to the royal family as a whole, but his specific duty was to protect the privacy and security of each individual member's personal spaces. Kate had been very clear when she first established this private room that it was to remain inviolate, and she had specifically requested that James personally ensure this boundary was respected. The guard's eyes moved from Camilla's face to the journal in her hands, then to the cracked photograph on the floor. The evidence of intrusion was undeniable, and both of them understood the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't just about palace protocol. It was about fundamental trust between family members. "Your Majesty," James continued, his tone remaining respectful but firm, "I'm required to report any unauthorized entry into the private quarters. The Princess of Wales left specific instructions that this room was to remain secured in her absence." Camilla's mind raced as she tried to process the implications of what James was saying. A report would mean that word of this incident would reach other palace staff, possibly the private secretary's office, and eventually, inevitably, it would reach William and Kate themselves. The thought of having to explain her actions to her stepson and daughter-in-law filled her with dread. "Perhaps we could handle this matter quietly," Camilla suggested, attempting to use her position to influence the situation. "I was simply looking for Kate to discuss some family matters, and I found the door open. Surely there's no need for a formal report over such a minor misunderstanding." But James Morrison was not a man who could be easily swayed even by royalty. His integrity and his commitment to his duties had earned him the trust of the royal family over 2 decades of service. He had seen many attempts to bend the rules over the years, and he had learned that compromising his principles inevitably led to bigger problems down the line. "I understand your position, Your Majesty, but my responsibilities are clear. The Princess of Wales trusted me to protect her private space, and I cannot ignore a breach of that trust, regardless of who is involved." His voice remained respectful but unwavering. The tension in the room was palpable as Camilla realized that James would not be persuaded to overlook what he had discovered. She looked around the room again, taking in all the personal details she had been examining moments before. Now, instead of satisfying her curiosity, they served as evidence of her violation of Kate's privacy. "What exactly do you intend to report?" Camilla asked, her voice taking on a sharper edge. She was beginning to feel cornered, and her natural instinct was to assert her authority. "That you found the queen consort in a room within her own residence?" James paused for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I intend to report that I found an unauthorized person in the Princess of Wales' private room examining personal belongings, in violation of explicit security protocols. The identity of that person is certainly relevant to the report, but it doesn't change the nature of the violation." The formality of his language made the situation feel even more serious. Camilla realized that James was treating this as a genuine security incident, not just a family misunderstanding. In his mind, the sanctity of Kate's private space had been violated, and his duty was clear regardless of family politics. "I suppose you expect me to simply hand over this journal and leave quietly?" Camilla said, still holding the leather-bound book that contained Kate's private thoughts. "I expect you to respect the Princess of Wales's privacy and property, Your Majesty. The journal belongs to her, and your presence here is unauthorized. Yes, I do expect you to return her property and allow me to secure the room as she requested." The standoff continued for several more moments, with neither party willing to back down. Camilla was acutely aware that every second she remained in the room made her situation worse, but her pride made it difficult to simply acquiesce to the guard's demands. She had never been in a position where her authority was questioned so directly, and it was deeply uncomfortable. Finally, practical considerations won out over pride. Camilla carefully placed the journal back on Kate's desk, trying to position it exactly as she had found it. She stepped carefully around the broken photograph, making a mental note that she would need to find a way to replace it before Kate returned. "This conversation remains between us for now," Camilla said as she moved toward the door. It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a request either. James Morrison's expression didn't change. "I have my duties to perform, Your Majesty. I cannot make promises about matters that affect the security and privacy of other family members." As Camilla reached the door, she turned back to look at the room one more time. What had started as curiosity had become something much more complicated and potentially damaging. She had learned more about Kate in the past hour than she had in years of family gatherings, but the knowledge had come at a terrible cost. "You don't understand the complexities of family relationships, James," she said, making one final attempt to appeal to his understanding. "Sometimes we need to know more about each other to build stronger bonds. With respect, Your Majesty, I understand that trust is the foundation of any relationship, family or otherwise. Without trust, there can be no genuine closeness." His response was quiet but pointed, and Camilla felt the sting of the implied criticism. She left the room without another word, but she could feel James's eyes following her as she walked down the corridor. Her footsteps, which had seemed purposeful and confident on her way to Kate's room, now felt hurried and uncertain. The entire dynamic of her position in the palace had shifted in the space of an hour. Behind her, she could hear James speaking quietly into his radio again, and she knew that the wheels were now in motion for a formal report of the incident. There would be no going back, no pretending that this had never happened. The consequences would have to be faced, and they would likely be more serious than anything she had anticipated when she first decided to explore Kate's private space. As she made her way back through the corridors toward her own quarters, Camilla's mind was filled with the images and words she had discovered in Kate's room. The vulnerability and isolation that Kate had expressed in her private writings created a completely different picture from the confident, poised woman who appeared at public engagements. She found herself thinking about her own early years in the royal family, When she had felt like an outsider trying to find her place in an established hierarchy, she remembered the loneliness and the constant sense of being watched and judged. In many ways, Kate's private thoughts echoed her own experiences, but somehow that shared understanding made her violation of Kate's privacy feel even worse. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as Camilla reached her own wing of the palace. The contrast between her comfortable, established private quarters and Kate's more intimate, vulnerable space was striking. Camilla realized that she had never felt the need to hide her thoughts and feelings in the same way that Kate apparently did. Perhaps that was because she had come to the royal family later in life, with a fully formed identity and no need to transform herself to fit royal expectations. As she settled into her sitting room, Camilla tried to imagine how the next few hours and days would unfold. James would file his report, which would reach the appropriate administrators. Eventually, someone would have to decide how to handle the situation. Would they speak to Kate and William directly? Would they try to resolve it internally? Or would this become a formal disciplinary matter? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little control she had over what happened next. Her fate was now in the hands of others, and that was not a comfortable position for someone accustomed to wielding considerable influence within the royal family. She also couldn't stop thinking about Kate's journal and the insights it had provided into her daughter-in-law's inner life. The public saw Kate as someone who had effortlessly transitioned into royal life, but the reality was clearly much more complex. Kate struggled with the same feelings of inadequacy and isolation that many people experienced when joining established families, but she had to do it under the intense scrutiny of the public eye. Camilla found herself feeling a genuine empathy for Kate that she hadn't expected. For years, she had seen Kate primarily as William's wife and the mother of her step-grandchildren. She had appreciated Kate's dedication to her royal duties and her obvious love for the family, but she had never really considered the personal cost of Kate's position. The broken photograph haunted her thoughts as well. It had been a beautiful image of Kate and William on their wedding day, both looking radiantly happy and full of hope for their future together. The crack running through the glass seemed symbolic of what Camilla might have damaged with her intrusion. Would her relationship with Kate and William ever be the same after this incident? As evening approached, Camilla realized that she would have to tell Charles what had happened before he heard about it from someone else. The thought of that conversation filled her with anxiety. Charles valued family harmony above almost everything else, and he had worked hard over the years to build strong relationships between all the family members. This incident would be particularly painful for him because it involved his wife and his son's family. She also knew that Charles would be disappointed in her judgment. He had always trusted her to handle family matters with discretion and wisdom, and this incident represented a serious failure on both counts. The thought of seeing disappointment in his eyes was almost worse than the prospect of facing Kate and William's anger. The palace around her seemed quieter than usual as the staff went about their evening routines. Soon, Kate and William would return from Scotland, expecting to find their home as they had left it. Instead, they would be greeted with news of this violation of their most private space. Camilla couldn't imagine how she would feel if someone had gone through her personal belongings and read her private thoughts. As she sat in her chair watching the last light fade from the windows, Camilla realized that this incident might fundamentally change her relationship with Kate and William, and possibly with Charles as well. Trust, once broken, was incredibly difficult to repair, especially within a family that was already under constant public scrutiny. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her room made her tense with anxiety. Was it James Morrison coming to update her on his report? Was it Charles returning early from his own engagements? Or was it news that Kate and William were back and wanted to speak with her immediately? Whatever came next, Camilla knew that her moment of curiosity had set in motion events that would test the strength of the royal family in ways that none of them had anticipated. The footsteps outside Camilla's door belonged to Charles, who had returned earlier than expected from his engagement in London. His face showed concern as he entered her sitting room, and she could immediately tell that something was troubling him. Her heart sank as she realized that James Morrison's report might have already reached him. "Camilla, we need to talk," Charles said, his voice carrying a gravity that she recognized from the most serious family discussions they had shared over the years. He settled into the chair across from her, and she could see the weight of whatever news he carried in his expression. "I've just been briefed by the private secretary about an incident this afternoon," he continued, his eyes searching her face for some explanation. "James Morrison filed a report about finding you in Kate's private room, apparently going through her personal belongings. Please tell me there's some misunderstanding." Camilla felt a wave of relief that Charles was giving her the opportunity to explain, but also a crushing sense of guilt as she realized she would have to admit to behavior that she knew would disappoint and hurt him. Their relationship had been built on honesty and mutual respect, and she was about to test both of those foundations. "Charles, she began, then stopped, realizing that there was no way to make her actions sound reasonable or justified. "There's no misunderstanding. I was in Kate's room, and I was looking at her personal things. I know how it sounds, and I know it was wrong." The silence that followed her admission seemed to stretch for an eternity. Charles's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, and something that looked like genuine sadness. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled, which somehow made his words more impactful than if he had shouted. "Why, Camilla? Why would you violate Kate's privacy like that? You know how important trust is within our family, especially given the pressures we all face from outside scrutiny. What could possibly have motivated you to do something like this?" Camilla struggled to find words that would explain her actions without making them sound even more petty and inexcusable. How could she tell her husband that she had been driven by jealousy and curiosity about Kate's private thoughts? How could she admit that she had sometimes felt insecure about Kate's place in the family and her own relationship with her stepson and his wife? "I suppose I wanted to understand her better," she said finally, knowing how weak it sounded even as the words left her mouth. "Kate and I have always maintained a polite relationship, but I sometimes feel like there's a distance between us. I thought if I could see into her private world, I might understand how to bridge that gap." Charles leaned back in his chair, processing her explanation with the same careful consideration he brought to all complex situations. But she could see that her reasoning wasn't resonating with him the way she had hoped it might. "Camilla, building relationships requires trust and respect, not espionage. If you wanted to understand Kate better, the appropriate approach would have been to spend more time with her, to have honest conversations, to show genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. Violating her privacy is the exact opposite of building trust." The truth of his words stung because Camilla knew he was right. In her desire to understand Kate, she had chosen the one approach that was guaranteed to damage any possibility of a closer relationship. She had acted like someone who viewed Kate as a subject to be studied rather than a family member to be respected. "What does James's report say exactly?" she asked, dreading the answer but knowing she needed to understand the full scope of what had been documented. Charles pulled out a folder that she hadn't noticed him carrying when he entered the room. "According to James, he found you in Kate's private room examining personal documents and holding one of her journals. He also noted that a photograph had been broken during your time in the room. He was very professional in his report, but he was also very clear that this constituted a serious breach of security protocols." The mention of the broken photograph made Camilla wince. That detail somehow made the whole incident feel more real and more damaging. She had left physical evidence of her intrusion, a permanent reminder of her violation of Kate's space. "James also noted that you attempted to convince him not to file a report," Charles continued, his tone growing more stern. "That concerns me almost as much as the original incident, Camilla. It suggests that you knew your behavior was wrong and were trying to cover it up rather than taking responsibility." Camilla felt a flash of defensiveness at Charles's words. "I wasn't trying to cover anything up. I was trying to prevent unnecessary drama and conflict within the family." Sometimes discretion is more valuable than rigid adherence to protocol. Discretion would have been not entering Kate's room in the first place, Charles replied, his voice sharpening slightly. Once you made that choice, asking a staff member to compromise his integrity to protect you from the consequences was not discretion. It was an abuse of your position. The criticism hit home because Camilla knew it was justified. She had indeed tried to use her status as queen consort to pressure James into overlooking her transgression. At the time, it had seemed like a reasonable request, but in hindsight, she could see how inappropriate it had been. "What happens now?" she asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Now we have to decide how to handle this situation in a way that preserves family relationships while also acknowledging the seriousness of what happened," Charles said. "Kate and William are returning from Scotland tomorrow morning, and they'll need to be told about this incident before they hear about it from someone else." The thought of facing Kate and William with this news made Camilla's stomach clench with anxiety. She tried to imagine how she would feel if someone had violated her private space in such a fundamental way, and the thought was deeply uncomfortable. "Will you tell them, or do you expect me to?" she asked. "She will tell them together," Charles said firmly. "This affects our entire family, and we need to handle it as a united front, even while acknowledging that what you did was unacceptable." Camilla appreciated Charles's use of the word "we," but she could also hear the steel in his voice that let her know she shouldn't mistake his willingness to stand with her for approval of her actions. He was disappointed in her, and that disappointment was perhaps more painful than any anger would have been. "Charles, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen," she said, reaching for his hand. "I made a terrible error in judgment, and I'm genuinely sorry for the position it's put you in, and for what it might do to our relationships with William and Kate." He took her hand, but his grip was less warm than usual. "I believe you didn't intend for this to happen, but that doesn't change the fact that it did happen, and it happened because of choices you made. Intentions matter, but actions and consequences matter more." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Charles's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered with an expression that suggested he had more unpleasant news to share. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've just received word that the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to return to London this evening rather than tomorrow morning. They should arrive within the next 2 hours. I believe we may need to accelerate our timeline for addressing the afternoon's incident." Charles exchanged a look with Camilla that conveyed both his anxiety about the approaching conversation and his continued disappointment in her behavior. "Thank you, Clive. Please arrange for William and Kate to meet with us in the Oak Room as soon as they arrive. This is a matter that needs to be addressed immediately." As Sir Clive left to make the arrangements, Camilla felt her anxiety spike dramatically. She had hoped to have more time to prepare for this conversation, to think through what she would say and how she might begin to make amends for her actions. Instead, she would be facing Kate and William while the incident was still fresh and raw. "What do I say to them?" she asked Charles, her voice smaller than she intended. "You tell them the truth," he replied without hesitation. "You explain what you did, you acknowledge that it was wrong, and you apologize sincerely. You don't make excuses, and you don't try to minimize the seriousness of what happened. And then you hope that they're willing to forgive you and work together to rebuild the trust that you've damaged." The simplicity of his advice made it sound easy, but Camilla knew that the execution would be anything but simple. How do you apologize for such a fundamental violation of trust? How do you explain behavior that you can barely understand yourself? As they sat together in the growing darkness, waiting for Kate and William to arrive, Camilla reflected on how drastically her day had changed. This morning, she had been the queen consort, secure in her position and relationships within the royal family. Tonight, she was facing the possibility that her actions might have permanently damaged some of the most important relationships in her life. She thought about Kate's private writings, which had revealed a vulnerability and humanity that made Camilla's violation of her privacy seem even more cruel. Kate had trusted the palace to protect her private space, and that trust had been betrayed by someone who should have been her ally and protector. The broken photograph kept returning to her thoughts as well. In her mind, it had become a symbol of everything she might have shattered with her moment of weakness. Would Kate and William ever be able to look at her the same way again? Would family gatherings forever be shadowed by the knowledge of what she had done? "Charles," she said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Whatever happens with Kate and William, I want you to know how sorry I am for disappointing you. Our relationship means more to me than anything else in the world, and I hate that I've given you reason to question my judgment." He squeezed her hand gently, and for the first time since he had entered the room, his expression softened slightly. "Camilla, my love for you hasn't changed, but my trust in your judgment has been shaken. Trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and consistent behavior that demonstrates you've learned from this experience." Before she could respond, they heard voices in the corridor outside. Kate and William had arrived. Camilla's heart began to race as she realized that in a matter of minutes, she would have to face the consequences of her actions head-on. There would be no more time to prepare. No more opportunities to think through her words carefully. The next few hours would determine whether the royal family could weather this crisis with their relationships intact, or whether her moment of curiosity would create lasting damage that could never be fully repaired. The Oak Room at Kensington Palace had witnessed countless family meetings over the years, But the atmosphere as Kate and William entered that evening was unlike anything that had come before. The room, with its dark wood paneling and formal portraits of previous generations of royals, seemed to hold its breath as the four family members took their positions around the polished conference table. William's face was set in stone as he and Kate settled into their chairs across from Charles and Camilla. Kate looked tired from their journey back from Scotland, but there was something in her expression that suggested she already suspected this was more than just a routine family meeting. Her usual grace and composure were evident, but Camilla could detect an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for meeting with us so late," Charles began, his voice formal in the way it became when he was dealing with serious royal business. "There's been an incident today that requires immediate discussion, and I felt it was important that we address it as a family before any rumors or incomplete information could circulate." Kate's eyes moved between Charles and Camilla could see the exact moment when Kate realized that this meeting was about her. The princess's expression didn't change dramatically, but there was a subtle shift, a guardedness that hadn't been there moments before. "What kind of incident?" William asked, his voice controlled but with an edge that Camilla had rarely heard before. As the future king, William had learned to manage his emotions in public settings, but this was clearly testing that self-control. Charles looked at Camilla, giving her the opportunity to speak first, but she found herself unable to form the words. The reality of what she had done seemed even worse in this formal setting, surrounded by the weight of royal history and family responsibility. "This afternoon, security reported an unauthorized entry into Kate's private room," Charles said when Camilla remained silent. "The person responsible was found examining personal documents and belongings. That person was Camilla." The silence that followed Charles's statement was deafening. Kate's face went completely pale, and her hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, slowly clenched into fists. William's reaction was more visible. His jaw tightened, and Camilla could see him working to control his breathing. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Kate said quietly, her voice so controlled that it was almost a whisper. "Are you saying that Camilla was in my private room, going through my personal things?" "Yes," Charles confirmed, his voice heavy with regret. "James Morrison discovered her there and filed an official report. She was found holding one of your journals, and it appears that some of your documents had been examined." Kate closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were filled with a mixture of hurt and anger that made Camilla feel physically sick. This was a woman who had always been gracious and kind to her, who had included her in family celebrations and shown her nothing but respect. And this was how Camilla had repaid that kindness. "How long were you in there?" Kate asked, looking directly at Camilla for the first time since the meeting began. I don't know exactly. "Perhaps an hour," Camilla admitted, her voice barely audible. "An hour?" Kate repeated, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You spent an hour going through my most private possessions. You read my personal writings, my letters, my journals." William's control finally snapped. He stood up from his chair so suddenly that it scraped loudly against the floor. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice rising despite his obvious efforts to maintain composure. "How could you violate Kate's privacy like this? That room was sacred to her. It was the one place in this entire palace where she could be completely herself, completely private." "William, please sit down," Charles said firmly. "We need to handle this like adults, not like children having a tantrum." "Don't talk to me about acting like children," William shot back, though he did reluctantly return to his seat. "My wife's privacy has been violated by someone who should have been protecting her, not spying on her." The word spying hit Camilla like a physical blow. That's exactly what she had been doing, though she hadn't thought of it in such stark terms before. She had been treating Kate like a subject to be investigated rather than a family member to be respected. "Kate, I want to explain why I did this," Camilla said, finally finding her voice. "I know there's no excuse for my behavior, but I want you to understand that it wasn't done with malicious intent." "Then what was your intent?" Kate asked, her voice still unnaturally calm. "What did you hope to accomplish by violating my privacy so completely?" Camilla struggled to find words that would make her actions sound less terrible than they clearly were. "I've always felt like there was a distance between us, despite our public appearances of family unity. I thought if I could understand your private thoughts and feelings, I might be able to find a way to build a closer relationship with you." Kate stared at her for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. So your solution to feeling distant from me was to secretly read my private journals and go through my personal belongings? Did it never occur to you to simply talk to me, to invite me for tea or lunch, or any of the normal ways that people build relationships? I didn't think, Camilla began, then stopped, realizing that Kate was absolutely right. She had chosen the most invasive and destructive possible approach to a problem that could have been solved with basic human communication.
You didn't think, William echoed, his voice dripping with disdain.
You didn't think about Kate's feelings. You didn't think about the trust we've placed in this family. You didn't think about the respect that Kate deserves as a member of this family and as a human being. Charles tried to regain control of the conversation. William, I understand your anger, but we need to focus on how to move forward from this situation constructively. Move forward? William said incredulously. How do we move forward from something like this? How does Kate ever feel safe in her own home again, knowing that family members might be secretly going through her private things? Kate had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice steady but filled with pain. What did you read, Camilla? What private thoughts and feelings of mine are you now privy to? The question was like a knife to Camilla's heart because it forced her to confront the specific ways she had violated Kate's privacy. I saw some letters you had written to William, she admitted quietly. And I looked at photographs that you keep privately. I was holding one of your journals when James found me, but I didn't read much of it. But you read enough, Kate said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Camilla admitted. I read enough to see that you sometimes struggle with feeling like you belong in this family. I read about your concerns and your doubts. Kate's composure finally cracked slightly, and Camilla could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. Those were my private thoughts, my way of processing the challenges of this life. They were never meant for anyone else to see, especially not someone whose opinion of me I was worried about in the first place. The irony of the situation was not lost on any of them. Kate had been writing about feeling like an outsider in the family, and now the person she had been worried about judging her had indeed been judging her, secretly and invasively. Kate, Camilla said, reaching across the table as if to take her hand, but Kate pulled back before she could make contact. The things I read made me realize how much we have in common. You've struggled with many of the same feelings I had when I first joined this family. If anything, it made me want to support you more, not judge you. But don't you see how wrong that is? Kate replied, her voice rising for the first time. You don't get to decide what parts of my private life you're entitled to access. You don't get to read my most vulnerable thoughts and then claim it was for my own good. That's not how trust works. That's not how family works. William nodded emphatically at his wife's words. Kate has given everything to this family, he said. She's sacrificed her privacy, her normal life, her ability to make mistakes without the whole world watching. The one thing she kept for herself was that room, and you took that away from her. The weight of what William was saying settled on Camilla like a crushing burden. She had indeed taken away the one sanctuary that Kate had carved out for herself in their very public life. The room that had been Kate's refuge was now tainted with the knowledge that it wasn't truly private, that even family members couldn't be trusted to respect its boundaries. I know I can't undo what I've done, Camilla said, her voice breaking slightly, but I want to make this right somehow. Tell me what I can do to earn back your trust. Kate was quiet for a long moment, seemingly lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and careful. I don't know if trust can be rebuilt after something like this, Camilla. Trust isn't just about believing that someone won't hurt you in the future. It's about feeling safe with them, feeling like they understand boundaries and respect them. I don't know if I can ever feel that way with you again. The honesty of Kate's response was devastating, but Camilla knew she deserved it. She had destroyed something precious and irreplaceable, and Kate had every right to question whether it could ever be rebuilt. What about the family? Charles asked quietly. We need to find a way to move forward together, for the sake of everyone involved, including the children. The children, William said, his voice filled with fresh anger. How do I explain to George, Charlotte, and Louis that their grandmother violated their mother's privacy? How do I teach them about respect and trust when this is the example they're seeing? This was a dimension of the problem that Camilla hadn't fully considered. Her actions didn't just affect her relationship with Kate and William, they potentially impacted her relationship with her step-grandchildren, and the values they were learning about family and trust. Kate seemed to be thinking along the same lines. The children can't know about this, she said firmly. Whatever happens between us as adults, they shouldn't be burdened with this knowledge. They need to feel secure in their family relationships. It was typical of Kate, Camilla realized, to be thinking about protecting the children, even while processing her own hurt and anger. It was yet another reminder of the kind of person Kate was, which made Camilla's violation of her privacy seem even more inexcusable. "I agree about the children," Charles said. "And I think we need to discuss how to handle this situation with the staff as well. James Morrison was required to file his report, but we need to ensure that this incident doesn't become fodder for gossip or leak to the press." "The staff," William said bitterly. "Now Kate has to face the people who work in this palace knowing that some of them are aware that her privacy was violated by her own family. How is she supposed to feel comfortable here anymore?" The meeting had been going on for over an hour, and the emotional toll on everyone was evident. Kate looked exhausted and emotionally drained. William was still visibly angry, though he was working hard to keep his temper in check. Charles appeared deeply saddened by the whole situation, and Camilla felt like she was drowning in shame and regret. "I think we should take a break," Charles suggested. "We're all emotional right now, and we're not going to solve this in one conversation. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow when everyone has had time to process what's happened." But Kate shook her head. "No, I want to finish this tonight. I want to know where I stand in this family, after what's happened." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This was about more than just the violation of her privacy. It was about her place in the family, her sense of security, and her ability to trust the people closest to her. The future of their family relationships balanced on what was said next. The tension in the Oak Room reached its peak as Kate's words echoed in the silence. Her question about where she stood in the family after Camilla's betrayal cut to the heart of everything they had been discussing. This wasn't just about a violation of privacy anymore. It was about the fundamental bonds that held their family together. William reached over and took Kate's hand, a gesture of support that spoke volumes about where his loyalties lay. "Kate's place in this family should never be in question," he said firmly, looking directly at his father. "She's given everything to serve this institution and this family, and she deserves absolute protection and respect from every one of us." Charles nodded slowly, clearly recognizing the seriousness of his son's words. "You're absolutely right, William. Kate's position in this family is unquestioned and unquestionable. What happened today was wrong, and it doesn't reflect how any of us truly feel about Kate or her place among us." But Kate wasn't satisfied with reassurances. Her experience had taught her that words could be empty, and she needed something more concrete. "I appreciate what you're saying, Charles, but I need to know that this will never happen again. I need to know that my privacy will be protected, not just from outside threats, but from people within our own family." The implication was clear. Kate no longer felt safe from the people who were supposed to protect her. Camilla realized that her actions had shattered something fundamental in Kate's sense of security within the royal family. It would take more than apologies to repair that kind of damage. "What do you need from us?" Charles asked gently. "What would help you feel secure again?" Kate was quiet for a long time, clearly thinking through her answer carefully. When she spoke, her voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I need new locks on my private room, ones that only I control. I need assurance that no one else will have access to that space under any circumstances. And I need time to decide whether I can rebuild trust with Camilla." The request for new locks hit Camilla like a physical blow. It was a concrete reminder that Kate now saw her as a threat to be protected against, rather than family to be trusted. But she knew she had no right to object to any measures Kate felt were necessary. "Of course," Charles agreed immediately. "We'll have new security installed tomorrow, and you'll be the only one with access." Camilla didn't just read a letter that was lying around. She systematically went through Kate's most private possessions for an hour. She violated every boundary that Kate had established. Charles tried to calm his son. "William, I think we all understand the seriousness of what happened. Camilla has acknowledged her wrongdoing, and Kate has outlined what she needs to feel secure going forward. But where are the consequences? William pressed. What happens to ensure that this kind of violation doesn't happen again? Are we just going to pretend that an apology and new locks are sufficient? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. William was essentially asking whether Camilla would face any formal consequences for her actions, or whether her position as queen consort would protect her from accountability. Kate placed a restraining hand on William's arm. William, I appreciate you fighting for me, but I don't need Camilla to be punished. I need to know that she understands the gravity of what she did, and I need protections to ensure it doesn't happen again. Beyond that, consequences won't undo what's already been done. Her grace in that moment was remarkable, but it also highlighted just how much Camilla had taken from her. Kate was being forced to be the bigger person, to manage everyone else's emotions while processing her own violation and hurt. I do understand the gravity of what I did, Camilla said, looking directly at Kate. I violated your trust, your privacy, and your sense of safety in your own home. I made you feel exposed and vulnerable when you should have felt protected. There's no excuse for that, and no apology that can undo the damage I've caused. Charles had been listening to this exchange with a heavy heart, clearly wrestling with his dual loyalties to his wife and his daughter-in-law. I think we need to establish some formal protocols going forward, he said. Clear boundaries about privacy and access that apply to everyone in the family, myself included. It was a wise suggestion, but it also represented a sad acknowledgement that their family now needed formal rules to govern behavior that should have been guided by basic respect and common sense.
I think that's a good idea.
But I also think we need to address the staff situation. James Morrison did his job perfectly. He protected my privacy and followed proper protocols. I don't want him to feel like he did anything wrong by reporting what he found. The mention of James Morrison reminded them all that this incident had implications beyond just the family. The palace staff had witnessed this violation of trust, and they would be watching to see how the family handled the aftermath. James will be commended for his professionalism and discretion, Charles assured her, and will make it clear to all staff that proper protocols were followed and should continue to be followed in all similar situations. As the conversation began to wind down, the emotional exhaustion of everyone involved was evident. They had covered the basic facts of what happened and established some ground rules for moving forward, but the deeper work of rebuilding relationships would take much longer. I think we should end here for tonight, Charles suggested. We're all tired and we need time to process everything that's been discussed. Kate nodded, standing slowly from her chair. I just want to say one more thing, she said, looking around the table at everyone present. This family has been through many challenges over the years, and we've always found a way to work through them together. I hope we can do that again, but it will require honesty, respect, and time. William stood as well, clearly ready to leave and provide comfort to his wife after such a difficult evening. The children are staying with your parents this week, he told Charles. We'll tell them that there was a family meeting about palace security, which is technically true. They don't need to know the details. It was a relief to know that George, Charlotte, and Louis would be protected from the knowledge of what had happened, but it also meant that family gatherings would be complicated for the foreseeable future. How do you maintain normal relationships when such a fundamental trust has been broken? As Kate and William prepared to leave, Kate turned back to Camilla one final time. I want you to know that I'm not angry anymore, she said quietly. I'm hurt and I'm disappointed, but anger takes too much energy that I need for other things. I hope you can learn from this experience and become someone who builds trust rather than breaking it. With those words, Kate and William left the Oak Room, leaving Charles and Camilla alone with the weight of what had transpired. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings. She's remarkable, Camilla said finally, her voice filled with regret. Her grace under pressure, her concern for the children, her willingness to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on punishment, I've never appreciated those qualities more than I do right now. Charles nodded sadly. She is remarkable, which makes what you did to her even more incomprehensible to me. You had the opportunity to build a relationship with an extraordinary woman, and instead you chose to violate her privacy and betray her trust. The conversation between Charles and Camilla continued late into the night, as they worked through their own relationship in light of what had happened. Charles made it clear that while his love for Camilla hadn't changed, his ability to trust her judgment had been seriously damaged. He would need to see consistent evidence of changed behavior before he could fully trust her again. In the days that followed, the palace implemented new security protocols and installed additional locks on Kate's private room. The staff were briefed about the importance of privacy and discretion, and James Morrison was quietly commended for his professionalism. Kate and William maintained their public duties and appearances, but their interactions with Camilla became noticeably more formal and distant. Family gatherings were polite but strained, with an undercurrent of tension that everyone could feel but no discussed openly. Camilla found herself isolated in a way she hadn't experienced since her early days in the royal family. The easy camaraderie she had built with various family members was now colored by the knowledge of what she had done. People were polite to her, but there was a wariness that hadn't been there before. The broken photograph from Kate's room was quietly replaced, but for Camilla, it remained a powerful symbol of what she had damaged with her moment of weakness. Trust, once broken, proved to be much more difficult to repair than a simple picture frame. Months later, as the family continued to navigate their changed relationships, it became clear that some wounds heal faster than others. Kate eventually allowed Camilla back into her life in limited ways, but their relationship never returned to what it had been before. There was always a careful distance, a guardedness that served as a reminder of what had been lost. For Camilla, the incident became a defining moment, not just in her relationship with Kate and William, but in her understanding of herself and her role within the family. She had learned the hard way that curiosity, unchecked by respect and empathy, could destroy relationships that had taken years to build. The royal family, as they always had, survived the crisis and found a way to move forward. But they did so with a new understanding of the fragility of trust and the importance of protecting the private spaces that allow people to be human in a world that demands perfection. The lesson was costly, but it was learned, and in time it made them stronger, if not closer, as a family.